Hello, survivors. Thank you for taking the time to listen to the story. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our channel. We appreciate it, and thank you in advance. Please leave the name of the city you're listening from in the comment section below. It helps us see our reach in the community. Let's start the story. They say we never move, never speak, never break. And for years I didn't. I stood at my post outside Buckingham Palace. Rain, snow, protest, ceremony. Tourists laughed, children waved, and I stood still, always still. That October morning was no different, despite the bitter rain that had soaked through my uniform over the course of my shift. The scarlet tunic grew heavier by the minute, water streaming down my bearskin cap and into my eyes. Yet I remained motionless, staring straight ahead as rivulets carved paths down my face. It was nearly deserted that day. Even the most determined tourists had retreated to cafes and museums. Just the occasional black cab splashing through puddles, their headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. I remember thinking it would be an easy shift. Quiet. 4 more hours until rotation. I first noticed something was wrong when a delivery van crashed into the gates across the plaza. Not the main gates near me, but the side entrance where supplies come in. The sound of crunching metal cut through the steady drumming of rain. Protocol dictated I maintain position unless directly threatened, so I did, though my eyes shifted slightly toward the commotion. 2 guards from the other post jogged over. Standard procedure. I could see them speaking to the driver through my peripheral vision. The man stumbled out, movement stiff and awkward. I assumed he was drunk or having a medical emergency. Either way, not my concern. Not yet. Then one of the guards screamed. In 6 years as a King's Guard, I'd never heard that sound from one of our own. It went against everything we stood for: discipline, composure, restraint. The scream was primal, filled with genuine terror. I broke protocol, turned my head fully toward the scene. The delivery driver had one of my colleagues by the throat, but not in any normal way. His teeth were buried in the man's neck, tearing away flesh. Blood mixed with rainwater, spreading across the pavement in diluted crimson streams. The second guard was backing away, radio in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. Something inside me knew this wasn't just violence. This was different. Wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. My training took over before my mind could process what was happening. I abandoned my post, rifle at the ready, and approached the scene. The radio was already crackling with urgent voices. By the time I arrived, the driver had dropped my colleague's limp body and was lurching toward the second guard, who had drawn his sidearm. "Stop right there," he shouted, voice wavering. "On the ground now." The driver paid no heed. His face was corpse pale, skin taut like shrink wrap over bone. Veins protruded dark blue against the pallid complexion. His eyes, bloodshot and glassy, reflected nothing, like doll's eyes in a wax figure. Fresh blood dripped from his chin, spattering his delivery uniform in crimson droplets. When he moved, each limb rotated independently, as though the central nervous system had malfunctioned, creating a lurching rhythm that resembled a broken marionette. The guard fired a warning shot. The driver didn't flinch, didn't even blink, just kept advancing with that same terrible determination. "What's wrong with him?" I asked, breaking years of public silence in an instant. Before my colleague could answer, the radio erupted with chatter. Multiple incidents reported throughout the palace grounds. Medical emergencies, violent assaults. The words "infected" and "contamination protocol" repeated urgently. The second shot took the driver in the shoulder, spinning him around. But he merely staggered, then righted himself, continuing his relentless approach. The third shot hit him square in the chest. Still, he advanced. "The head!" someone shouted through the radio. "Aim for the head!" My colleague's fourth shot caught the driver between the eyes. He collapsed like a puppet with severed strings, body splashing into a puddle that quickly turned red. We stood there, rain pounding down, staring at the bodies. The palace alarm began to wail, its sound dampened by the downpour but unmistakable. Lockdown protocol. "What the hell is happening?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears after years of public silence. "Don't know," my colleague replied, reloading his weapon with shaking hands. But it's not just here. Hearing reports all over central London. A series of rapid gunshots from the palace's east entrance punctuated his statement. Then screams. Multiple voices calling for backup. We ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to find chaos. 3 more guards were attempting to hold back what looked like groundskeeping staff, but something was clearly wrong with them. They moved with terrible efficiency, limbs swinging in disjointed arcs, bones visibly shifting beneath skin that had lost its elasticity. Their heads rotated in abrupt bird-like movements, as though their necks had forgotten how joints worked. At rest, they swayed gently like seaweed in a current, but when stimulated, they charged with the desperate lunge of starving predators. 2 bodies already lay on the marble steps, palace staff members whose throats had been torn out. "Containment protocol," shouted Commander George, appearing from inside, pistol drawn. "Get inside, seal all entrances, move." I'd never seen fear on Wilson's face before. The man had served in Afghanistan, Iraq. He'd stared down terrorists without blinking, yet now his eyes were wide, skin pale. "Sir, what is this?" I asked as we retreated inside, helping to secure the heavy doors. "Some kind of infection," he replied, voice low so the others wouldn't hear. "Reports coming in from all over the city. People attacking people, eating them. Then the victims get up and do the same thing." My mind rebelled against his words. It sounded like something from a horror film, not reality. Not my reality of polish and protocol and standing sentinel. "Are you saying—" "I'm not saying anything," he cut me off sharply. "Just follow protocol and secure the premises. The royal family is being evacuated via helicopter from the back gardens. Our job is to maintain security until that's complete." The palace interior, normally a place of meticulous order, had descended into barely controlled panic. Staff members rushed about, some crying, others barking orders. Through the windows, we could see more figures approaching from the street, civilians whose bodies twitched and jittered with each step, heads cocked at impossible angles. A noxious odor permeated the air even inside, a mixture of copper, rot, and something medicinal, like alcohol swabs left too long in the sun. "They're coming from St. James's Park," announced another guard, Evans, who'd taken position at a window. Dozens of them, moving slow but steady. Wilson organized us quickly, deploying guards at each entrance and vital corridor. The palace would become our fortress. From the brief snatches of radio communication still coming through, I gathered that similar scenes were playing out across London. Westminster, Trafalgar Square, the Tower, all overrun. I was stationed at the north entrance with 3 others. We watched through reinforced glass doors as more infected individuals joined the crowd outside. Their faces pressed against the glass, leaving smears of blackish fluid that wasn't quite blood. Hands pawed repeatedly, fingers curled like talons that scraped with a sound reminiscent of sandpaper on stone. Moist, guttural moans escaped from throats that seemed incapable of forming words, primal sounds that raised the hair on my arms. Their eyes, milky white with pinprick pupils, darted erratically, flinching at movements as though their vision operated in stuttering frames. "Save your ammunition," advised Arthur, the oldest among us. "Shooting through glass compromises the door's integrity." So we waited, watching the crowd grow. Rain continued to pour, but they seemed oblivious to it. Their clothes soaked through, hair plastered to gray skin, yet they showed no discomfort, no reaction at all beyond their single-minded effort to reach us. Through the windows, we could see smoke rising from various points across the London skyline. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing fewer by the hour. Occasionally, we'd hear gunfire or the thrum of helicopters overhead. The wider battle for London was clearly not going well. Inside, Wilson had transformed the palace's staterooms into a command center of sorts. Radios, what few were working, were centralized there. Staff members with medical training converted the kitchen into a makeshift infirmary. Those with military backgrounds were armed with whatever was available, mostly ceremonial weapons from the palace collection, but they were better than nothing. By noon, 3 hours into the crisis, we had a clearer picture of what we were facing. The infection, whatever it was, spread through bites. It killed quickly, within minutes, and then, impossibly, reanimated the dead. These reanimated corpses had only one drive: to bite, to spread the infection. They didn't speak, didn't reason, didn't feel pain. Only headshots stopped them permanently. "Like zombies," whispered Miles during a brief moment of rest. "Actual zombies." No one corrected him. The word hung in the air, absurd yet undeniable. We had perhaps 60 people inside the palace: guards, household staff, a few visitors who'd been inside when the lockdown began. The royal family had been successfully evacuated, we'd been told. Our new mission was to protect those remaining and hold the palace until help arrived, if help was coming at all. As afternoon wore on, the rain finally stopped. Watery sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the scene outside with cruel clarity. The streets had become a grotesque tableau. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some twitching with involuntary spasms, others motionless. Cars sat abandoned, doors flung open as their owners had fled. And everywhere, the infected wandered with disjointed movements, some dragging mangled limbs that bent at unnatural angles, others rigid like wind-up toys wound too tight. Their collective moans rose and fell in volume like a macabre tide, punctuated by occasional high-pitched wails that sounded almost like laughter. Inside, we took stock of our situation. Food wasn't an immediate concern. The palace kitchens were well stocked. Water might become an issue if the municipal supply failed, but we had enough bottled reserves for a few days. Ammunition was our biggest problem. Between the active guards, we had perhaps 200 rounds. Not enough if the infected breached our defenses in significant numbers. I found myself stationed with Jenkins at a window overlooking the Victoria Memorial. From this vantage point, we could see infected individuals streaming in from the mall. Some wore torn business suits, others blood-spattered tourist attire. All shared the same sickly gray pallor, as though their blood had drained completely. The stench rising from the growing crowd was overwhelming, a putrid mix of decay, feces, and something chemical I couldn't identify. They moved with bizarre coordination. When one suddenly changed direction, others followed seconds later, like fish in a disturbed pond. "Look there," Jenkins murmured, gesturing with his rifle. Among the infected wandered a woman who wasn't like the others. She moved deliberately, crouched low, clutching what looked like a crowbar. A survivor making her way through the horde by mimicking their movements. I watched, transfixed, as she navigated between them, heading toward the palace. "Should we help her?" I asked. Jenkins hesitated. Opening any door right now would be a death sentence. So we watched as she crept closer, making it all the way to the palace gates before her luck ran out. An infected businessman suddenly pivoted 180 degrees, joints popping audibly, and lunged forward with alarming speed. His teeth, stained rust brown, found her shoulder, tearing through her jacket with a sound like fabric ripping. Her scream drew others who converged with staggered, accelerating steps, fingers grasping and pulling with disturbing strength. Within seconds, she disappeared beneath a writhing mass of bodies. I turned away, bile rising in my throat. "Nothing we could have done," Jenkins said quietly. "Remember that." The hours crept by. We rotated positions, checked barricades, conserved ammunition. The palace's ancient walls held firm, but the constant pressure of bodies against doors and windows created an atmosphere of suffocating tension. Every creak, every groan of wood or metal sent hearts racing. Outside, London burned. Night would fall soon, and with it, new dangers. We had no idea what these creatures might do in darkness, if their behavior would change, whether more survivors might emerge, seeking shelter, or if we were truly on our own now, the last bastion of order in a city that had fallen in less than 12 hours. I checked my watch. 4:47 p.m. Just over 7 hours since the first attack at the gates. Commander Wilson gathered us in the main hall for a briefing. His face was drawn, eyes bloodshot from strain, but his voice remained steady. Latest radio contact suggests military units are attempting to establish a perimeter around central London, he informed us. Their primary focus is Westminster and Whitehall, protecting government infrastructure. What about us? Someone asked. We're on the list, Wilson replied, though his tone lacked conviction. But we need to prepare for the possibility that help won't arrive immediately. Maybe not for days. A murmur ran through the assembled guards and staff. Days seemed like an eternity in our current situation. We need to conserve resources, maintain vigilance, and… Wilson's instructions were cut short by a tremendous crash from the east wing. "They're in!" came a shout. "The east entrance is breached." "Weapons ready!" Commander George bellowed, his voice carrying over the shouts and screams. "Fall back to secondary positions." We'd prepared for this eventuality, establishing defensive fallback lines throughout the palace. I sprinted toward the east wing, joining a group of 6 other guards already taking aim at the corridor leading from the compromised entrance. The first infected stumbled into view, a middle-aged woman in a torn palace staff uniform. Her right arm hung at an awkward angle, clearly broken. Each step she took caused bones to grind audibly beneath her skin. Behind her came others, gardeners, maintenance workers, and what appeared to be tourists who had breached the outer defenses. "On my mark," ordered Lieutenant Dawson, the oldest of our group. 3, 2, 1, fire. Our shots rang out in unison. The woman's head snapped back, body collapsing like a pile of sticks. 2 more fell behind her, but others kept coming, stepping over fallen bodies with no regard for their fallen companions. The stench hit us like a physical force, putrid and metallic, like spoiled meat soaked in copper. I fought the urge to gag as I reloaded. Another volley dropped more of them, but our ammunition wouldn't last forever. "Fall back to position 3, Dawson ordered as the corridor filled with more infected. We retreated through ornate state rooms that had hosted royalty and dignitaries for centuries, now serving as a battleground. The opulent furnishings, priceless antiques and artwork became makeshift barricades as we pushed furniture against doors. The palace staff accompanying us were ashen-faced, many crying silently as they helped secure each room we passed through. These were people who had spent decades polishing these same furnishings, now watching as we used them to barricade doors against the dead. In the picture gallery, we made another stand. The long hallway offered clear sight lines and multiple exit points. Here, Arthur joined us, breathless from running. "West Wing is still secure," he reported, "but they're outside every entrance now, hundreds of them." I checked my ammunition, 15 rounds left. Not enough. Through the commotion, a voice called out from behind us. "The King's Gallery is secured as a command center. All personnel report there for reassignment." We fell back again, room by room, until we reached the King's Gallery. Commander George had transformed the historic space into a strategic headquarters. Maps of the palace were spread across tables. Guards and staff with military experience were assigned to critical junctions throughout the building. Medical supplies salvaged from various first aid stations were centralized. "Status report," George demanded as our group entered. "East entrance is breached," Dawson replied. "We've established barricades through the Queen's Guard chamber, but they won't hold long. We've lost at least 4 guards and an unknown number of staff." George's face remained impassive, but I could see the strain in his eyes. "We need to consolidate our defenses. The palace is too large to protect fully with our numbers." He outlined his plan. We would abandon the outer sections of the palace and create a defensible core around the central staterooms. It meant sacrificing historic spaces, but it gave us a fighting chance. As we reorganized, I found myself partnered with Evans again. He'd acquired a ceremonial sword from one of the display cases. Not ideal, but better than nothing when ammunition ran out. "Never thought I'd see the day," he muttered as we moved furniture to block a corridor. "Training to protect the palace against terrorists? Sure. But this, the dead walking? Focus on what we can control," I replied, though my own mind struggled with the reality before us. A palisade approached, carrying a battery-powered radio. "You need to hear this," she said, her voice trembling. She turned up the volume so we could all hear the transmission. "This is an emergency broadcast from the armed forces. London is under quarantine. Military checkpoints have been established at all major exits from the city. Civilians are instructed to remain indoors and await evacuation. Be advised that infected individuals can only be stopped by severe trauma to the brain. Repeat, London is under quarantine. They've written us off, Evans whispered, eyes wide. No, George countered firmly. They're containing the situation. Standard protocol. They'll start evacuation once they've established secure corridors. No one believed him, but no one challenged him either. We needed hope, however thin. Night had fully fallen now, casting the palace into darkness, save for emergency lighting and the occasional flashlight beam. Outside, fires burned uncontrolled throughout the city, casting an orange glow through the windows. The constant moaning of the infected formed a macabre background noise that never ceased, rising and falling like twisted waves against the shore. We'd established our defensive perimeter through the central staterooms, the bow room, and sections of the West Wing. 53 survivors remained by our last count. Some were injured, others in shock. All were terrified. The infected continued to pour into the abandoned sections of the palace. We could hear them shambling through corridors, bumping into furniture, occasionally breaking items that crashed to the floor. Their sense of direction seemed primitive but effective, always moving toward sounds or movement, testing every barrier with relentless pressure. Around 9 p.m., nearly 10 hours since the first attack, our situation deteriorated further. The power failed completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by battery-powered emergency lights and flashlights. Water pressure began to drop as well, suggesting municipal services were failing throughout the city. In the darkness, the infected seemed to grow more agitated. Their moans intensified, and they threw themselves against our barricades with renewed vigor. Through cracks in the furniture blockades, I could see their silhouettes, dozens of bodies pressing forward, hands clawing at wood and fabric. "Why aren't they getting tired?" whispered a young woman from the kitchen staff, her eyes wide with fear. "They don't feel fatigue," Arthur explained gently. "They don't feel anything." A tremendous crash from the corridor outside silenced further conversation. One of our barricades had partially collapsed. Immediately, grasping hands pushed through the gap, fingers bent at odd angles, skin torn and blackened with dried blood. "Secure that breach," George commanded. 4 of us rushed forward, using our weight to push a heavy cabinet back against the opening. The infected on the other side pushed back with surprising strength. One managed to get his head through, jaw snapping wildly, teeth clicking together with enough force that I could hear enamel crack. Evans drove his sword through the man's eye socket, and the pressure briefly subsided. We reinforced the barricade with additional furniture, but the damage was done. Our perimeter was weakening. It wouldn't hold through the night. In the command center, George gathered the remaining guards for an emergency meeting. "We need to consider evacuation," he said bluntly. "The palace roof has a helipad. If we can get a signal out, there's a chance of helicopter extraction." "And if we can't?" someone asked. George hesitated. "There's a network of tunnels beneath the palace. Old service passages, some dating back centuries. They lead out beyond the grounds, eventually connecting to the underground system." This was news to most of us. Palace security operated on a need-to-know basis, and these tunnels weren't part of standard briefings. "The problem," George continued, "is that we don't know the condition of those tunnels or what might be waiting in them. They could be our salvation or a death trap." The decision was made for us moments later, when a section of ceiling in the adjacent room collapsed. The infected had found their way into the floor above us and overwhelmed structural supports. They fell through the opening in a tangle of limbs, some breaking upon impact, but others rising immediately, fingers grasping, teeth bared. "Tunnels!" George shouted above the gunfire. "Everyone to the basement access. Move!" I helped usher palace staff toward the designated exit, while guards created a defensive line. The infected closed in from multiple directions now, driven into a frenzy by the noise and movement. Their bodies contorted as they pushed forward, limbs twisting in ways human anatomy shouldn't allow, joints popping, muscles straining visibly beneath gray skin. At the basement access, Arthur handed out the few remaining flashlights. "Stay together," he instructed the frightened staff members. "Follow the red pipes along the ceiling. Don't stop for anything." I found myself at the rear of our evacuation group, alongside Evans and 3 other guards. We would be the last to enter the tunnels, covering the retreat of the others. The infected broke through our final defensive line as the last civilians disappeared down the narrow staircase. There were too many to fight, a relentless tide of grasping hands and gnashing teeth. "Go!" I shouted to Evans as I fired my remaining rounds into the approaching horde. "I'll hold them off." "Not happening," he replied, standing firm beside me. "We go together or not at all." The other guards had already retreated down the stairs. It was just the 2 of us now, facing dozens of infected that poured into the room from every entrance. "On 3, I said, backing toward the staircase. 1, 2, 3. We turned and plunged down the narrow steps, pulling the heavy door shut behind us. The metal groaned as bodies slammed against it from the other side, but the old engineering held firm. The tunnels were exactly as George had described, ancient brick passages barely wide enough for 2 people to walk abreast. Pipes ran along the ceiling, including the red heating lines that marked our path. The air was damp and stale, carrying the musty scent of centuries. We caught up to the others, moving as quickly as possible through the dim passages. Every few minutes we'd hear distant sounds from above. Crashes, moans, the occasional scream. The palace was falling room by room. After what seemed like hours but may have been only 20 minutes, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. Old maintenance equipment sat abandoned, covered in decades of dust. Multiple passages branched off in different directions. George consulted a faded map he'd brought with him. "This way," he indicated a passage to our left, "should lead us toward Green Park Station." We continued on, our group now numbering just 31. The rest had been lost in the chaos or had never made it to the evacuation point. Every face was streaked with dirt and sweat, eyes wide in the dim flashlight beams. The tunnel began to slope upward, and soon we reached what appeared to be a maintenance door. Through small cracks around its frame, we could see flickering light, perhaps fires burning in the city above. "Listen," George instructed, pressing his ear to the door. We all fell silent, straining to hear. Outside, the familiar moans of the infected drifted through, but they sounded distant, scattered. Not the concentrated mass we'd left behind. "I'll check," I volunteered, stepping forward. After all we'd been through, I couldn't let someone else take this risk. George nodded grimly. "Be careful." I eased the door open just enough to peer through. We had emerged in what appeared to be a maintenance room for the underground, filled with tools and spare parts. Beyond another door, I could see the platform of Green Park Station, dimly lit by emergency lighting. There were infected present, perhaps a dozen visible from my position, but they were dispersed throughout the station, not clustered near our exit. Some swayed in place while others wandered aimlessly across the platform. I reported this to the others, and George quickly developed a plan. We would move in tight formation through the station, avoiding confrontation if possible. If we could reach the street level, we might find clearer paths or even military units establishing the quarantine perimeter. As we prepared to move out, Arthur placed a hand on my shoulder. His eyes were serious beneath bushy gray eyebrows. "Whatever happens," he said quietly, "we did our duty today. Remember that." I nodded, unable to find words. The palace had fallen, centuries of history now overrun by the dead. The monarchy had survived, thanks to early evacuation. But our failure to hold the palace weighed heavily on all of us. We moved through the maintenance room in silence, then carefully out onto the station platform. The infected nearest to us turned, nostrils flaring as they caught our scent. But George had anticipated this. 2 guards with melee weapons dispatched them before they could alert others with their moans. Our group hugged the wall, moving toward the exit stairs. So far, our luck was holding. The station wasn't as overrun as the streets above had been. Perhaps the infected had followed larger crowds elsewhere. We were halfway to the exit when disaster struck. A young staff member, overcome with stress, suddenly broke from formation and ran for the stairs. Her footsteps echoed through the station, drawing every infected head in our direction. What followed was chaos. The infected surged toward us from all directions, moving with that disjointed yet determined gait that still haunts my nightmares. Some galloped on all fours like feral animals. Others propelled themselves forward with asymmetric lurches that defied normal movement patterns. "Run!" George ordered, abandoning stealth for speed. "Get to the surface!" We sprinted for the exit, the infected close behind. I found myself at the rear again, helping a limping staff member keep pace. Evans stayed with me, his sword slick with dark fluid from the infected he'd struck down. The stairs loomed ahead, our salvation. Above them, a glimmer of pre-dawn light filtered down. Morning was coming, though whether it would bring hope remained to be seen. The majority of our group made it to the stairs, climbing toward street level. I urged the limping man forward, practically carrying him the last few meters. "Go!" I shouted to Evans. "I've got him!" Evans nodded and turned to climb, but a grasping hand caught his ankle. He fell hard, face slamming into the concrete steps. Before he could recover, the infected had pulled him back down. Others swarmed over him instantly. I wanted to help, to pull him free. But the man in my arms couldn't move on his own. Saving one meant sacrificing the other. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Though Evans couldn't hear me over his own screams, I dragged the injured staff member up the stairs, away from the feeding frenzy below. We emerged onto Piccadilly to find dawn breaking over a transformed London. Smoke rose from dozens of buildings. Abandoned vehicles littered the street. Bodies, both motionless and animated, sprawled across sidewalks and roadways. But beyond the immediate chaos, I could see something else. Military vehicles establishing a perimeter several blocks away. Soldiers in hazmat gear directed survivors toward collection points. Helicopters circled overhead, likely assessing the situation or providing support to ground units. Commander George was already organizing our remaining group, 27 survivors in total. He'd made radio contact with a military unit that was sending an extraction team to our position. I helped the injured man sit on a bus stop bench, then stood guard with my empty rifle. It was useless as a firearm now, but the infected wouldn't know that. As we waited for extraction, I found myself looking back toward Buckingham Palace. From this distance, it appeared untouched, its majestic facade giving no hint of the horror within. The flag still flew from the central tower, though no royals were in residence. A final, defiant symbol of continuity amid collapse. "They'll reclaim it," Arthur said, noting my gaze. "Once this is contained. The palace has stood for centuries. It will stand again." I nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at me. The infected we'd encountered showed no signs of deterioration or weakness. They would continue until destroyed. Clearing the palace would require a massive operation, with significant casualties. The military extraction team arrived 30 minutes later, 3 armored vehicles with mounted guns. We were quickly loaded inside, joining other survivors collected from nearby locations. As we pulled away, I took one last look at the palace. A figure stumbled through the main gates, a guard in the distinctive red tunic and bearskin cap. His uniform was torn and bloody, movements erratic. Another royal guard transformed into the very thing we'd sworn to protect against. That was 12 hours ago. I'm writing this from a military quarantine facility outside London. They've told us the city is lost for now. The infection spread too quickly, overwhelmed response capabilities. Official estimates suggest 60% of London's population is either infected or dead. The royal family is safe, evacuated to an undisclosed location. The government continues to function from secure facilities, but Buckingham Palace, along with most of central London, remains in the hands of the dead. They say we never move, never speak, never break. For years, that was true, but when the world itself broke around us, we adapted, we fought. Many of us died, and some of us survived to tell the story. Of the 53 people who entered those tunnels beneath the palace, 27 made it out. Commander George, Arthur, the staff who had spent their lives in service to crown and country. Ordinary people who found extraordinary courage when faced with the unimaginable. But not Evans, not dozens of others whose names I knew and faces I recognized. They remain in the palace, transformed into something inhuman, wandering historic halls that once epitomized the height of human civilization. I don't know what tomorrow brings. The quarantine zone expands daily as military forces fall back before the infected tide. News from other cities suggests London isn't unique. This infection has appeared globally, though details are sparse. All I know is that I stood my post until it became impossible. I did my duty as best I could, and if called upon, I would do so again. For now, though, I stand a different kind of watch over the survivors of Buckingham Palace, waiting for the next chapter of this nightmare to unfold. They say we never move, never speak, never break. Today, that's no longer true. We move to survive. We speak to warn others. And yes, sometimes we break under the weight of what we've seen and lost. But we endure, and in the end, perhaps that's what truly matters.